Hello, welcome to the Signal and Noise podcast. We're brought to you by ROI Rocket. We are a market once company. My name is Brian Lamar. I work on insights and network quality here at ROI Rocket, and I'm flying solo today for the first time on this podcast. I've done it previously in other podcasts, but Andrew DeSillis, my typical co-host, is traveling. We have lunch plans today, and he lives an hour away, and I live 10 minutes away, so I have the fortunate opportunity to speak to Dan Foreman today. Hello, Dan. How are you, sir?
I am good. Thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure, and I'm glad that I can then chat with you. And I've got your undivided attention, and I'm calling I'm calling in today all the way from the UK. So this is now it's an intercontinental podcast that you're recording.
Yeah, I love it.
And thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Where are you, in London area?
Yeah, just outside London. Lovely
Okay.
little place. Sort of 20 minutes on the train.
Oh, nice. Oh, that's beautiful, then. I love London. I mentioned right before we started recording that I was going to introduce you, but you have such a kind of interesting background, and some of the company names, I'm not sure who they are. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and don't be shy. Maybe a little bit about your background, what you're currently doing.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm a career market researcher. Gosh, I passed the 30-year mark recently, which was a little bit of a surprise. Of course, I can do maths, but it just sort of hadn't quite hit me. Maybe it was crossing the millennium and the bug not hitting us the way that it was supposed to, that it caused me to count incorrectly. But I've essentially, I mean, like a lot of people, I've got a career of what I see as two halves. The first half was really climbing the career ladder, working in different companies, started out pretty big at Research International. And then it seemed that as I moved on from there, I kind of generally worked at sort of progressively smaller companies, but in progressively senior roles. So I was able to climb the ladder reasonably quickly. And I also sort of zigzagged a little bit as well. So I started in research, then went into marketing, then worked client side, then worked in consulting, then in advertising. And then the last company that I worked for in this first part of my career was a small company, family-owned company based out of Stamford, Connecticut, called FocusVision. I was the first non-American employee, and I started up basically their European and Asia operations. So that is interesting. So I was there at the stage where we transitioned from a family-owned company to private equity ownership. I was a big part of the fast growth that was being experienced outside of the US. And a number of the people who are still part of that Press Ganey, Forster, Qualtrics roll-up that's just recently been announced, they were still there in the days that I was around. So there's some good friends that will be personally affected or given opportunity in this kind of transition. So that was the first half of my career. Then the second half was really all about startup, scale up, investment, advising different businesses, primarily in the insight space. I draw kind of quite a big circle around insights, data, business intelligence, articulate the way we get insights in different ways. So I've been involved in some companies that were, startups, just ideas, companies like Zappi that, are now decent size. Also Bacamo as a co-founder of Valinx. I was in at an early stage, sort of pre-revenue, more than a handful of different companies around the insight space. And then I have a little bit of a sort of side interest. We might get into it and we might not, around biotech and longevity. So I spend a lot of time thinking around there. And there are some cross sections. And I found my way into it through connections and insights to start off with. But I suppose it's also topical as well because, Press Ganey being healthcare and it entering into this space around, technology acceleration and AI, etc. It's not too far of a reach to dive into these worlds of biotech. But these days, usually the short answer, I just tell people, oh, I'm an insights entrepreneur. And then if they want to get into it, we can get into different data collection methods, facial recognition, emotional analytics, etc. You can go in all sorts of different directions.
Oh, that's fascinating. When I talk about my past, people are like, "Oh my gosh, you have such a cool job," and I do. I have an awesome job, and I'm fortunate to be able to do what I do. I'm jealous of your background and what you get to do. Like, do people tell you that? Like, "Oh my gosh, you've done a lot of cool stuff in your time, and continue to do a lot of cool stuff."
They do, and I had a really. I've talked about this a couple of times at conferences. I had a really fascinating exchange with a music producer. I'm not sure your music tastes. I call Mark Ronson. I met him at a TED conference because that's one of sort of my personal development, personal growth initiatives. I try and get out to events that are outside of my sort of day to day. So
Hmm,
I've been to a lot of TED conferences and a lot of TEDx conferences across the
nice.
years. And I was chatting with Mark. He was speaking at the TED event, and I was talking to him, just saying, how cool it is that you sort of take concepts from people's brains and you can turn it into music. And you've worked with people like Amy Winehouse, some real superstars. He did Uptown Funk and that sort of thing. But when he turns around and says, "So what do you do?" And I say, "Well, we listen to people, we gather data, we advise brands, governments, uh, organizations, foundations, charities, all these different things. We take what's in people's brains that's really hard to find because sometimes people don't even know what they're thinking, and we translate that into some sort of action for business." He's the one turning around saying, "What you do is really cool." And I'm kind of speaking on behalf of a profession
Yeah.
rather than just sort of what I do. But yeah, I do understand that, even if the profession is really cool and what we do is awesome, then yeah, I'm playing in a pretty neat space. The why for me, the kind of the big motivation was really sort of growing up in the late 90s doing a lot of research that as I just scratched my head, I wondered why we were doing it that way. Why we were doing these long surveys, why are we asking questionnaires in a certain way, why we're putting people in artificial focus group environments, etc. And fortunately, that then it coincided with some fairly good technology advances. So, these days you can do great things on mobile, you can do lots of behavioral. We've got, in a sense, some of the world's biggest data streams used not only by us, but also by the CIA and others. People are constantly taking photos of stuff and posting it, just sharing information everywhere. Why shouldn't we harness that for good business
Mhm,
intelligence? So there are
mhm.
tons of fascinating opportunities where people, they've just got the exhaust fumes coming out of carrying around a mobile with you everywhere, and sharing your connected home, your voice, all sorts. It's fascinating.
I have so many questions. I'm gonna have to be careful not to go in all kinds of different directions. I think one thing I wanted to mention is that you're not just an insights entrepreneur, you give back to the industry as well. You're part of MRI. This is how I know you is through SMR and through MRII and through a lot of the associations that you're very involved in, and your voice is pretty loud. I'd love to know, being involved in those kind of associations, how has that also shaped your career and your viewpoint on the industry? You get access to some of the great minds in our industry. I love That's what I love about being the small parts that I get to play in those things. But you get to meet lots of other entrepreneurs and business owners and C level and interesting people. And yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, my journey with those sort of things, it goes really back to the beginning of my career. I was quite fortunate when I joined Research International on a graduate training scheme. One of the projects we did involved all the graduates, doing some research around category management, which was sort of an emerging trend in retail. And when the organization got selected to speak at ESOMAR the following year, so this was in 1996, they asked if one of the graduate trainees would be happy to come along and co-present. And I, not knowing what it was, but usually was up for volunteering for most things, I put my hand up. I was the only one that volunteered. It required going to Istanbul, which was cool. I hadn't been to Turkey before. And so I presented at this SMR event, age 22. And that just gave me a little glimpse into what was possible because there were these kind of company CEOs and chairs and these clients, maybe names that I'd read about in a report or seen in a
Mhm.
newspaper, but not actually ever had a chance to meet them. Now, none of them particularly wanted to talk to me. I'm 30 years younger than the average age or the next youngest person or something. But yeah, it was a really good eye opener. So then later in my career, when I had a chance to get onto that stage, more sort of earnestly, then I was really keen to embrace it. And, and I think it's just sort of inevitable. The more you start to like something, the more you perhaps want to have an active role in shaping it. So I stepped up onto the SMR Council back in 2010. And one of the first things that I thought was, and you'll have a glimpse of this from some of the boards that we've sat on together. I just thought this is kind of it's run by volunteers, and it shows. It's really amateur. This could do with a little bit of sharper thinking, more urgency. And so I then stepped into the president role at SMR, which was also kind of a new thing. I was the first SMR president ever under the age of 50. I was also under the age of 40. So it was a big step into that. So that was, again, that was pretty exciting. We did loads of things, launched an SMR Foundation because, what had also happened, slight segue, but, SMR is really, really international. And when I just started serving on the council, unfortunately, one of the senior interviewers at one of the market research agencies in Afghanistan had been murdered by the Taliban, and then they murdered their family. And this is someone just trying to do good research, walking around with a clipboard, but the Taliban just assumed they were spying for the American government or something. So they got killed in the line of work. And
I never knew that story.
Yeah, the SMR community really wanted to help. But it turned out that sending money into Afghanistan and trying to help families or getting involved with the companies there was pretty difficult. So it was an initiative that I led and really had to force through, was to create the SMR Foundation. One primary purpose of which is helping researchers in need, but it's in this type of need, some pretty serious stuff. And as the SMR Foundation grew, then of course we started learning about all sorts of things. There was an earthquake a couple of years ago, which massively affected an SSI telephone center. So there were people there who lost jobs and lost limbs, and the SMR Foundation was able to provide support. So that was an amazing thing to be involved with. But that was just one of many. Also when you're sitting on these kind of councils, it's a real privilege. Like you see with the MRII, you get a chance to find out what webinars are coming up, or you get an early glimpse of a report about something, about AI and how that's affecting the industry, or you're selecting venues. The recent SMR Congress was in Prague. Now, if you're on the inside track, you knew about that 2 years ago. So I've got good visibility on all, where the other venues are going, and what impact that potentially has on, a different area, whether it's in North America or Southern Europe, or last year it's in Greece, etc. So, you can give a lift to different communities. And you hinted at it right at the beginning. A huge part of that is, it's the networking. It's having those side conversations that you can have with people that, you don't always get an opportunity to have. And that's, particularly now that these days I'm into the M&A side of the business and the business ownership side, it's brilliant to learn from, some of the great names that, again, they sit on the boards that you're on. And, when they become friends, and you can have some of these, really, good side conversations on, either, major M&A activities, or even, just kind of starting cool new things up that address the problems around data quality, for example. It's really good. I mean, I remember chatting to you a couple of years ago around what we were trying to do with face verification. And, we were there, you're sort of shaping, how do we bring this to market? And to, if we were doing it not through sort of a friendly network, we'd have been paying a lot of money to get, the valuable expertise from people like you.
Right. I want to touch on something really quick. The SMR Foundation, I hope that's something that you're really proud of. I'm sure you are, but I'm just looking at the website, and it's amazing how it's flourishing, helping people in Cambodia, and with an earthquake in Myanmar. I could go through Kenya, scholarship awarded in Nigeria. It goes on, and that's just in the past few months. That isn't like over the past few years. That's just in the past few months. And so that is what an amazing thing to have started. And you said, I think you kind of alluded that you kind of had to push it. I've been in those kind of situations where you're trying to do what's right and there's obstacles in the way. And so you were young, and that's an amazing story that I hope you're really proud of. That's awesome.
Yeah, that was it really was one I had to push through. And then even after people, because I had to push it through the first council meeting to get it supported. We had people after, who were giving me a really hard time that, this is so outside of like what
Yeah.
ESOMAR was originally set up to do.
Hmm.
And yeah, I could understand their perspective, but also I didn't see that it was so outside. ESOMAR was formed after World War II, really to, like a lot of great institutions were, to try and ensure World War II never happens again. But it was about, really avoiding disasters, and working together, cooperating. And, that's also, I think the foundation was a natural extension of that. But it was also really important because in the first year, there was a lot of interference from people who had strong opinions. We had to then actually house it as a separate entity. And it was just kind of complicated because SMR was originally set up in Switzerland. Now it's in the Netherlands, trying to take donations in from all sorts of places. What do you do around taxes and all that sort of stuff? Now, there was a team to help, but it really did involve, I mean, it's a bit like building a small business and getting it going. And
Yeah.
yeah, having some, founding donations and yeah, having to put a lot in. It's probably something that, I mean, now, I mean, this, pride is a strange, yes, it's a complicated feeling. At the time, I was really happy that we were able to make it happen. And now I can look back on it with more pride. But, it's also one of lots of things that was going on, both with SMR and just generally with the business activities, when we
Yeah.
got it started.
You got some good experience there, but you've also worked in an advisory and investor roles for lots of companies. And I'm curious, how do you kind of pick and choose? Because I think you're at the point in your career, you have options and you've shown success. Obviously, Mark, lots of success. Um, and so how do you kind of choose who you want to work with?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I did codify it because about, let's think, it was a couple of years before COVID, I realized I started tracking the number of exploratory meetings that I was having with people. And I was surprised because it ran into more than 100. And
Oh gosh.
that's, yeah, in a given year. And that's not just, a half an hour conversation. Sometimes it is,
Mhm.
but usually it's, okay, let me have a think about it. Let me come back with a few questions. Let me maybe take out some references. So, it was occupying a significant amount of time.
Yeah.
And, of those 100, I only proceeded with one. And I was, I wanted to understand why, what was it led me to proceed there and not with the others. So I basically then reversed that into essentially a scoring matrix with those three different buckets. The first one of which is this going to incrementally improve the world of market research? That was I found out that was my founding question. And if so, then it makes it easy to proceed to the next set, which was then all about the business. And then the third set that was all about the sort of society and bigger kind of purpose. But the all about the business, I realized because I was then able to go back through other companies that I'd invested in the past, like Zappi, Latana, Phalanx, Dahlia, etc., and go through and basically say, wow, you scored top marks on every single box. So then that became the criteria. So if, for example, I find a really cool business, but I'm not 100% convinced about the founder or one of the founding team, then that's immediately, it's out. Even though I recognize people can change and be coached and improved, etc. But there's such a deal flow that I can afford to be sort of picky in that respect. And then, an important part around the business as well was ensuring that there was sort of nothing competitive. And then I had this also really random bit that I just called X Factor. It had to have something special that kind of um, allowed me to answer the question, what will the story be like in 5 years' time when somebody's saying, why did you get involved with that? So that could be as cool as that headquartered in Kenya. Kenya's smart. I'm talking to people in Cincinnati. They're not often saying they're working for a headquartered company that's there. So it can be anything. That's why it's an X factor. Like with Valence, the X factor was a Nobel Prize winning approach to behavioral economics. Cool. I don't know any other Nobel Prize winning approaches that are used in market research. So that's excellent. And so there's now a bit more of a science behind it, but it still fundamentally comes back to, is this a better way of doing things than the way I understand currently?
How many companies are you advising or working with like today? Is it three? Is it 20? How do you, it's kind of
In
fascinating to me.
Yeah, in the insight space, if I if I count my definition of insights, then it's
Yeah,
13. It's 13
13.
currently. Yeah. But then there's a couple, that are kind of a healthcare specific that are outside of that. But the time commitment varies. There's some, well, of course it varies across a year because, that's
Yeah,
generally what happens. But some of these advisory relationships, they're quite light touch. But others are, we're kind of in this together.
yeah,
Um, but an important criteria is, in all of the things that I'm involved with, these days, I have to ensure that our interests are aligned through some long-term incentive or equity or something. So that's key as well. And I've been fortunate in the past to have had a few successes, a few exits, some windfalls that come in, and that in turn, I mean, essentially, it just fuels a reinvestment into either insights or into that biotech that I referenced earlier.
yeah. So now I'd love to talk about the news.
Hmm.
The big news of yesterday, Qualtrics announced, I'm not sure how many billions, I think it was 7.5 billion. I might be wrong with that. Acquisition of Press Ganey and Forsta. Shouldn't be too surprising. But first of all, you mentioned you work at FocusVision, which turned into Decipher, which turned into Forsta, with some acquisitions along the way. And the first kind of question is, before we get into that, is FocusVision was Jane in Brazil, Kristen Luck, yourself. What kind of hotbed, like, what was it like back in the day with all these emerging entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs that now are so successful and some of the biggest names in our industry?
Yeah. Well, I'll have to sort of redraw the history slightly on that. So there was FocusVision. FocusVision, it was a family business. It got acquired by this company, Schroeder Ventures, which was a small private equity firm, now part of Permira, which is one of the largest private equity firms in the world, owns Hugo Boss amongst others. And FocusVision then acquired Revelation, it
Hmm.
acquired Research Reporter, then it acquired Decipher. So at that point, the whole Jamie in Brazil and Kristin Luck and um, Decipher acquiring Kristin's company, that was sort of a separate thread of the family tree.
Okay.
But then, yes, acquired Decipher and kind of merged it together. And then Jamin quickly became CEO. So yeah, there's all these kind of rising stars, but just coming through a couple of different threads, and then eventually the merger with Confirm It before rebranding as Forster. But what it was like in those days, I mean, for me, it was amazing because, as I said, I was the first non-American employee, so that meant I had this really grand title. I think I might have been 30 or I might have been 29. I'm not sure, but I was suddenly a managing director, which seemed really grand. Happened to be the only employee outside of America, but still, I'm the
Whatever
MD.
job title you want.
Exactly, yeah. So quickly hired a couple of other people, but the important part was that FocusVision ought to have expanded way earlier. So that meant that my side of the business was able to scale so quickly. And I started out as really just Europe, and then very quickly this became Asia. Then I took on responsibility for Latin America and Canada because it just seemed that everything I was touching, it was a bit of an open door, and people really wanted these capabilities of being able to remotely view different types of qualitative research. And it became, in a way, sort of one of the simplest sells because it was really good product market fit, having been honed in the US for sort of 12 years or so. Plus, there was some nice kind of market coincidences going on with, Skype starting to emerge and people understanding video streaming, increased use of the internet, etc. And our pricing model was extremely profitable. So I mean, it was kind of quite crazy. It sort of seemed that, I mean, I added about, I don't know, 30 countries to my countries I visited list in the first year.
Oh God.
It was really crazy. And generally I was finding that, I'd go to a meeting, tell people that you don't ever have to get on a plane and travel to Paris again, which if you've never been to Paris, cool. But if you've had to go there 6 times a year for 10 years, if you can avoid it, that's great. And that's largely what me and then essentially a team was doing, was just kind of flying around, installing some equipment, telling people that they can now click this button and for a fraction of a flight cost and cost time, you can have calls a bit like this, but you can watch people, physicians or consumers just from the comfort of your home or your desk, or you don't have to give up your night. You can watch it the morning after, it's kind of a video on demand. So it was a really, I mean, it was a brilliant blue ocean space. So it was hugely exciting. And that's also where my relationship with ESOMAR kind of got rekindled, because we also realized that, rather than going out to all these offices of all these different brands, if we could find that a load of companies across Asia were all going to this conference in Mumbai or Kuala Lumpur, then let's be there, let's sponsor it, let's host a cocktail party, and just, rather than have to do 20 trips, you can maybe talk to 20 different companies all at once. So yeah, I mean, it was pretty wild, but hugely successful, because when FocusVision sold to SV Schroeder Ventures, it was a great return for the family, who'd kind of taken quite a risky bet when they started out with, you can video conference this, and also the capital requirements for video conferencing technology were much greater than essentially just webcams and now internet streaming. So yeah, they got a well-deserved return. And for me, it was a launch pad, because not only were we selling a technology to people, it was a really helpful technology for people, which meant that the next time I kind of went knocking on their door, like, maybe a few years down the line, but for VST or for Zappi or Empower, then they're really happy, because last time I knocked on their door, I saved them loads of money, saved them time, helped improve their life, their working life. So, they were kind of happy to see me, which, is helpful.
You mentioned kind of the path to where we are today, where 6.75 billion, Qualtrics buys Forsta, and you Prescani Forsta, and you have a background in this that you just went through. You have a little bit of a healthcare understanding as well. Curious about your kind of high level thoughts on this. I'm still absorbing it. And when I think about this, this is what I mentioned earlier, is I think about it as a Forsta Qualtrics combination. But when Qualtrics has the press release and people talk about it, they don't really talk about that. They talk about the AI. They talk about the healthcare part of it. So I'd love your little 2 cents on the couple hours you've had to think about this.
Yeah, I have a few angles on it as well. I mean, I've read the press release, know a lot of people at all the companies, including the leadership. So whilst I didn't see it coming, it's also one of those that I instantly see, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, with the focus around what's in the press release. So around all the healthcare data and what could go on there, with a sort of HX, assuming that that's sort of the direction they'll take it. So I think it's going to be kind of interesting from a tech integration perspective. There's going to be a lot of people on the market, because there's going to be a lot of duplication of resource there. So, some synergies will be achieved, and there are some really good people at all these companies. So some of them are our friends. So whether they'll go on their own entrepreneurial route or get absorbed into other companies, I'd be curious about that. The other thing that jumped out to me quickly is this is the first now of the consolidations and the roll-ups that some people have hinted at. This is the first major one, like sort of since the kind of all the recent socioeconomic changes. That tells me there will be more of those. I mean, Forster itself was a roll-up, and we just sort of talked about that journey of it coming together, them being acquired by Prescani, them also then going through. I mean, there's been a lot of activity on their cap table for the last 4 or 5 years. So it'd be really intriguing to see, do they now fold something else in again, or might we see a couple of others on the side? And there's some sort of obvious names, around there. Because it was not that long ago even that In Moment joined that family as well. So there's that. Then, I mean, also, I always think about this with any transaction, but particularly a major one, the valuation and what the expectations will be, because this now has to deliver. The ownership structure on Qualtrics' side is one of delivery. Qualtrics is one of those companies done a really good job, always growing profitably, generating cash, and so this acquisition here of Prescani Forster, really going to have to, they're going to have to make it work. And we've seen lots of M&A activities that have gone that haven't worked in that same way. So I mean, that's interesting. And then I think just in general, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about AI and healthcare starting to come together, but in our space, this will be the first time that we are actually seeing that. So I'm pretty excited about because there's good tech throughout both of the businesses, how that comes together, but together with this sort of AI lens, and then the specific focus on healthcare. Yeah, that's interesting. Then, of course, there's loads of little subplots, like what will happen with all those FocusVision Decipher customers that aren't anything to do with healthcare. I mean, it's
Right.
a small proportion, but still not insignificant. So that could be divested, in some way. And the industry's got a good history of doing that sort of thing, like everything that's happened with GFK, with various
Mhm.
divestments that's going on. But as you were talking, I've got a question for you. If
Uh,
you could, if you had a big war chest and you could acquire any company, who would you acquire?
oh my goodness. What a question that I'm not prepared to answer, but I'm going to still answer it. I feel like a lot of the big names are overvalued, and let's assume I had a big pocketbook. I still probably wouldn't go after the big names, and that's names we've all heard of, Dynata, Nielsen. There's always those names out there. I would probably, and this is recency bias, I would probably acquire some sort of B2B validation technology company. I think there is a lot of opportunity in B2B research. I think that quality is bad, perception of survey and insights in B2B research is very, very poor. And so I think that there's a huge opportunity out there. And I'm not sure if the company I want to buy even exists. Outside of our industry, it'd be someone like an Experian. If there's an Experian in the marketing research, that's who I'd want to buy. Because I think people will pay, but there's not that many options of good B2B research out there. And it's very frustrating and makes me sad as a researcher for our industry right now. And again, this is a little bit of a recency bias, so this is kind of a rant as well. Now that I work in a panel company, I studied panels for a dozen years. I work in a panel company and I can see lots of different things. I can see the impact of having real verified respondents. I can see how expensive that is. I know how much people are willing to pay for that and how much people are not willing to pay for that. But I think there's a huge opportunity there if you can prove it out. And, the CPIs in beauty research are high. They're 40 to hundreds of dollars, where consumer has been commoditized, unfortunately, and that's got its own problems, but it's commoditized to the lowest possible incentive. So if I had a war chest, I'd probably spend some money and hire someone like you to help me find some sort of B2B validation company that could scale and really lift up the industry and that type of research.
Mm,
Didn't see that coming, probably.
that would be cool. Yeah. No, I mean, I wonder whether you'd go market research or you'd say, I really like ice cream, so I'm going to buy this company or this dog food company or something.
Oh, we could talk about that too. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
I have a government job, and so I kind of like you. When I think about research, my day to day is very diverse. Not nearly as diverse as yours, but I'm doing surveys among my neighbors some days, and I'm working on big projects like flooding and building a community center. And so that's really a lot of my passion. And I lend things from marketing research into my government job and vice versa. I'm sure you do the same thing. And it gives us the ability to tell great stories when you can take things from one industry and apply it to another. And so I've been doing a lot of thinking about how marketing research and government can work about together and things like that. So I'm not sure where I would invest in, but there's some opportunity there as well.
Mm. Oh, nice.
Ice cream shop would be nice in my neighborhood at least.
Yeah, with nice ice cream for dogs. Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is a sad story. I mentioned in the last podcast. You saw my dog in Atlanta not too long ago, I think, briefly. That was her last trip. She died a couple weeks ago, and so that was her last trip. And it was ironic that the bulldog went to Georgia for her last trip. She was old and could barely walk, and I would
Yeah.
bring her to conferences, and she got kind of well known at conferences. The Quirks people would give her badges, and Insights Association would give her a badge, and she was part of some of the networking event, and she sat in a couple presentations I gave as kind of a mental health dog, and so it kind of comes full circle a little bit. And It's a sad, but we live our dogs all the time. She lived a great life, and she's very old, and yeah, maybe something for dogs for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, that is sad news because dogs are part of the family.
It's okay. Yeah, she lived a good life, and I just had a grandson 2 weeks ago. So it kind of puts things in perspective, the circle of life and
Mm.
things like that. So yeah, everything's all good. How are you doing? How's London? When are you gonna be back to the States? How any other life updates?
Gosh, probably, I mean, tons. But when am I back? So this is relatively unusual, but it's been quite a hectic travel for a while. So I'm in I'm in Europe for 3 weeks, and then heading back over for TMRE, and then I'll probably stay over until, and I'm not sure, certainly till after Thanksgiving. And I'm not sure whether Christmas is in UK or US this year yet. And then, well, kind of life slash business update. The biotech stuff that I've referred to, we announced last week in Singapore that from February to March, we're hosting this thing called the Infinite Games in Honduras, which is all about longevity. But there's, I mean, I'll send you a link to the website about all the different things. There's like some mind games. There's some mind games going on. So there's like chess tournament and debates and art competitions and things.
For a month?
There's also then sort of typical body games, marathon, triathlon, boxing, free diving. The free diving looks quite good. Social games. I don't even know what this is, but it's been announced as a crypto golf tournament. I don't know what crypto golf is. But the ones I'm most excited about are the frontier games. So this is really all about longevity stuff. So there's a beauty pageant for biomarkers. And if you've seen the Don't Die documentary, it will be those sort of things. So the beauty pageant for choose your biomarker, it might be something about the age of your hair on your head or the strength of your eyesight, but there's going to be like a pageant set up in a typical pageant style for that. Different sort of challenges, genetic upgrade challenges, augmentation challenges, so different types of strength, etc. Underwater photos, which is less, I mean, that's a frontier game, but it's not
Wow. So
sort
you'll
of
be in
same
Honduras
activity.
for a lot of that time?
Yes, that's the plan. I don't know whether
Oh
I'll
my
go all
gosh.
2 months, but that is the goal. Yeah.
Yeah, please
Um,
send the link. I want to get more information about that for sure, and we'll put that in the show notes. But that sounds fascinating.
yeah.
I'm all
Yeah.
about
It'll be
that.
fun.
I'm gonna hopefully there's some of it's televised somehow. I can stream it maybe. We'll see.
Yeah, and so some of it will be televised for sure. Yeah, I mean, there's other things as well. The electric knife fights are very popular. They are kind of, as they sound, they're basically these, rubber blades, but with a little kind of electric taser. And you literally have a knife fight. It's like fencing, but with a small knife. But and they're electric, so they happen at night, so you can only really see the blade. You can't necessarily see your opponent so well. But that's like really become kind of a big thing in the biohacking community, that people play that and take it pretty seriously. I'm not young enough and agile enough to be any good at it, but it's still fun to
Yeah.
participate.
Gosh.
But yes,
Well,
it will be. There's a few other things that we've done over there that have been televised, and I mean, I'll send you a link, and if you want to go down a rabbit hole, there's a big rabbit hole to go down. But otherwise, it's just kind of interesting with the first link I send.
I was just telling people I'm looking for a new rabbit hole to go down. So this maybe this is it. Well,
There's
that's
the
taking more than
candidates
enough
for
of your
you.
time. And something I love about this podcast, I get to pound you with crazy questions on it for 30 minutes, and I really appreciate it. I wish I'd have done this sooner because you have such an interesting past, and you can give so much to other people, and so appreciate your time. And man, I hope that maybe I'll meet you in Honduras or something. But if not, happy holidays, and we'll talk soon.
That would be great. And I mean, you say you pound people with questions. It hasn't felt like that, but I'm glad that I was able to throw a question back at you, and you
Oh, I know, I love it. Of course,
invented a new
you'll want to do
business.
that.
So, perfect.
Absolutely. Well, again, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thanks a lot. And if you want more information on this, Dan Foreman's active on LinkedIn, and all of the companies he works for, they're all out there, and we'll put the link out to the Honduras games, the heritage stuff, and yeah, thanks again, and have a great day.
Thanks, Brian.